When I think about it now, I really didn't know what to think. When Pyradym first came into being, I essentially made a prototype and thought that it would be a one-off sort of thing. But based on my professional experience, I did put enough forethought into it to answer the question of, well, what if somebody else wants one of these? I didn't really think about where this was going or where it was going to be. At the time that it was conceived under the notion of being an electronic singing bowl, no one really had a thought as to what that would actually look like. And even today, there is not really an industry for this. But having a background at Moog Music, I take quite a bit of solace in that understanding, because back when the Moog synthesizer was being presented to the musical public and to the listening public, there was no synthesizer industry. Not really sure where this is going, but I do understand that there's an obvious need for it. I think one of the things that we've learned from the recent pandemic situation is that health care isn't just necessarily not being sick. There's a mental and emotional aspect associated with being healthy. As I like to say, Pyradym is an ideal instrument for people that want to meditate, that can't meditate. It's easy to use and it's fun to use. It has a very profound range of what it can be utilized for. One of the questions that was always asked was, okay, so if people are buying these, who's buying them? Is it individuals for their own personal practice, or is it professionals that wish to use it in their therapeutic business and things of that nature? And the answer was always yes, because there was both factions that were interested in working with, for lack of a better term, sound therapy, even though Pyradym is much more articulate than that.
I wanted to find a way to use the Pyradym in my daily massage practices, not only for my clients to facilitate a better experience for them, but also as a practitioner, it has created for me just an easing of the reach that I have to put into facilitating that deeper place that people need to go to in order to facilitate real change. And it's pretty remarkable as an advanced practitioner to have a feeling of having a buddy in the room that basically helps me sense and feel where the adhesions or the scar tissue pattern is built up, and being able to actually feel through the extension of the frequency that's generated by the Pyradym how that changes resonance along the client's body.
I would say that the first 10 years or so of Pyradym, there would be 3, 4, 5 sales a year, but more and more people are becoming concerned with their emotional health and meditative practice. And people are starting to look around as to what they can readily access. Pyradym allows you to explore a greater frequency spectrum. Music is sound, but sound is not necessarily music. It's the way that it's organized. So there's the content, but there's also the intent with what you're using to organize sound in order to create a specific feeling. People have been toning for centuries in the concept of using the essence of all music and distilling it down into something that we call physioacoustics, which is the vibrational component of the music, is something that we're really just sort of starting to explore. So it's sort of a new interpretation of a very ancient practice. There is a tremendous amount of value to be found in exploring sound in a non-musical context, so that you can sort of remove all of the compositional elements of it and get right down to the resonant component of creating the sound and working with that in a form that is not necessarily as much of a listening experience, but more of a emotional, participatory, vibrational experience. So the concept of presenting an instrument that could serve as a vehicle for that exploration for non-musicians in an easy way is a very valuable aspect of Pyradym, because you can throw away the performance aspect of a musical instrument. You can throw away the aspect of, playing things wrong. The only thing you need to know about playing Pyradym correctly is one thing. You just continually ask yourself, how does this sound feel?
With my physics training and background, I knew he knew what he was talking about and what he was doing. And so as he described how he designed the Pyradym units, my scientific aspect of my brain got very excited, because I knew he wasn't talking about a construct that was more metaphysical. He was actually putting the nuts and bolts together at a physical level of how to really work with frequency.
One of the main components of the Pyradym instrument is this. This is the power supply board. This is a linear power supply design. The reason being is that switching power supplies that are typically employed in computers and televisions and pretty much every other kind of electronic appliance that you can name create quite a bit of back EMF and electromagnetic interference that radiates out into the general area. Linear power supply designs don't do that. There's actually the employment of Reiki symbology, which is used on every circuit board that goes into Pyradym. And there's also some Egyptian biogeometry that's embedded right into the copper of the board. Egyptian biogeometry is an extension of an ancient technology that was pioneered more recently in 19th century France, and it's known as radioesthesia. Moving into the earlier part of the 20th century, it was sort of set aside because as electronic components became a little more sophisticated, these practices were no longer employed. They kind of thought it was a little too esoteric. But there is a good foundation for the concept of using shape to control electromagnetic activity. Pyradym employs a 52-degree pyramid, very similar in scale to the Great Pyramid. So we're basically focusing and collecting the etheric energy at this location on this circuit board and putting it in this little Reiki symbol. That means put the power here, using a selenite as the antenna with a copper wrap around it, coalescing that energy and moving it back up out of the instrument, and then amplifying it with this quartz crystal that's on the top. This is a product that doesn't have an industry. There's no competition because no one's quite sure what any of this is supposed to be, including me. All I'll offer is that the last 3 years have been more successful than the previous 3 years. But right now, as I look over on the big tally board, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clients in the build queue, and that'll take us up to serial number 74. It just keeps generating more and more interest and more appeal. I was told by my design team that this is so far ahead of the curve that you're going to have to wait for the curve to catch up, and I think the curve is finally catching up. What's involved with maintaining one's health is much more beyond just not being sick. The model of allopathic medicine is they more or less have the stance that you are going to get sick. It's just a matter of time, and when that happens, we have this drug that has been designed to address that. Well, that's not really health care, that's more sick care. And I think one of the shifts in consciousness that's now occurring is people that are interested in getting more out of their life. And there's a lot more natural ways that can be done. One of the aspects that I find very interesting about Pyradym is that we don't do any advertising. We don't do any marketing. It's all word of mouth. I think people, they find it when they're supposed to find it, and they usually find it in the most unusual ways. They tend to stumble across it. Over half of the clients that are in the build queue at the moment, as far as I know, have never actually experienced the instrument personally before. But when you look at the videos that are there, I think that there's such a reminiscent quality to the sound that Pyradym makes, even coming through the small speakers on someone's computer. It does sort of elicit that level of emotion, and there's a connection to it, there's an attachment to it. And a lot of people have actually met it and seen it before they actually saw it. So whether it was in dream time or past life, I can't venture a guess, but yeah, there's just something about it. I think reminiscent is a big component of the attraction of Pyradym.
Pyradym found me on Facebook, picking up on the algorithms of what I was searching at the time: pyramid energy, pyramid sites, quantum physics, sacred sites, everything pyramidal. It just showed up in my news feed, and from the moment I saw it, it was kind of like love at first sight. I had this crush on a device that I had no idea what I would do with. I had an understanding of the frequencies and the way it applied in terms of sound, because I have a background in sound engineering and music. And although I had a reasonable knowledge of chakras, I had no idea of how I would apply such a device. I wasn't thinking to become a sound practitioner and put myself out there in that way. And yet I couldn't let go of this feeling that it had stirred in me. It was just so beautiful, and I really couldn't stop talking about it. I was telling everyone about it, but then when I got with my partner, Dee Dee, and I told her all about it, she just turned to me, looked me dead in the eye and said, well, let's get one. Honestly, I guess that was the permission slip that I was looking for, just a bit of confirmation to dim down my rational mind, which was telling me, who do you think you are? What are you going to do with this? And we went ahead and made the purchase. I think it was after we'd paid the initial deposit. I had a conversation with August, and he didn't really tell us too much about the instrument itself, other than he assured us that our investment would come back to us tenfold. And he clearly stated that it may not be in terms of finance, but in other aspects you will see the return. And this is something that he was quite right about, because we most certainly have seen that return in many ways, spiritual, emotional, psychological. And many of the people that have sat with us in meditation and in personal sessions also would testify to this. We've seen significant shifts in perception. We've heard people give us accounts that they feel forever changed by their time with Pyradym, and it works in such unusual and really quite remarkable ways. It's very hard to describe the effect that it has until you experience it, because Pyradym is an experiential instrument. It's a feeling, and words often do little justice to feelings. It is something that translates best through feeling.
One of my favorite stories about the first time I presented Pyradym in public was at a trade show out in Denver back in 2004. And I had no expectation there, but I was sort of given the heads up from my guides that there are going to be people there that will greet it as an old friend and arrive at this show fully expecting that it will be there for them to meet. And at the same time, there are going to be people there that won't even see it. So going to the trade show, I standing at the booth behind Pyradym, you could see this couple sort of make a beeline going through the rows, and then came straight up to the table and looked at the sign and looked at the Pyradym sitting on the table and said, it's finally here. Yeah, it's exactly what we saw and fully expected to see when we came here. But conversely, there were so many other people that rolled up to the table and looked right at me and looked right at Pyradym, and you could see it in their eyes that they had no reference. And it was almost like I wasn't even there. They didn't ask me any questions. It was like it was an empty booth. Bob Moog had this great quote, because they would ask him how he got into the synthesizer business. And he said it was like falling backwards and slipping on a banana peel. It just sort of happened. He was in a certain place at a certain time, met a certain individual, and this thing happened. And then next thing you know, you're doing this, and then this led to this, and meeting this person led to that. It was the same experience, and you just sort of are making it up as you go along. There's more or less 3 or 4 isolated instances. But when I first moved to Asheville, we were just walking around downtown. I happened to stumble upon a singing bowl recital. And thought, well, that's very interesting. It's very Asheville. So, we went and checked out this singing bowl recital. Well, it turned out that the guy was a Tibetan monk that made singing bowls. They were all brass singing bowls, and they had about a dozen of them all around him. He was in the tradition of a singing bowl master, where they actually made the singing bowls, and he discussed the prayers that were put into every hammer stroke, and the devotion and the toning and all those esoteric aspects. And it was a very profound experience to weave this tapestry of sound with all these different singing bowls, and it was really quite etheric. And I thought, this is something that I thought Bob Moog would be really interested in. So I took one of the postcards with me and took it back to my office at Moog and threw it in the desk drawer and kind of forgot about it. Until one day, months later, when Bob was in my office, we were working on the Voyager synthesizer prototype at that time, and I was rooting around in my desk for, I don't know, a ruler or something. And I found the postcard. The words just sort of fell out of my mouth as I handed Bob the card. I said, "Hey, Bob, did you ever think about us doing an electronic singing bowl?" Bob looked at the card, he read the back, and he handed it back to me. He said, "You should do this." And it's one of those sort of things I just sort of put out of my mind. But then later on, I was studying channeling with the late, great Marilla Bailey. So she led a guided meditation, and there was a woman there that had just bought a singing bowl, and she wanted to play the singing bowl throughout this entire meditation. I went somewhere, I don't know where, but I met this being, for lack of a better word. It was a very reminiscent experience. It was like meeting someone that you have stayed in contact with but haven't seen for a long time. But it was a very warm and very inviting and very reminiscent experience meeting this energy. And the way we communicated it was I could communicate with my thoughts, and the response would be in sound and in light and in shape. So it was like this shimmering ball, but it kept changing shape and it kept changing color and it kept changing texture. You know, so we were having a conversation. It was communicating exactly what the responses to my questions were, and we were catching up. And it seemed like it was a very short meeting, but I think the meditation lasted at least a half of an hour. But anyway, we all came back and went around the room and shared our experiences. And I related the experience of meeting this being that I seemed like I'd known for a very, very long time. And Marilla had said that this was a very significant experience, and I think you should hang on to that experience. Several days after that experience, I was at home alone, and I heard this droning sound. It sounded like Tibetan monks toning or something like that. It was a very reminiscent sound, and I couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. So it's one of those sort of things you go around the house, no, the refrigerator's not running, no, the furnace isn't running. It wasn't the air conditioning running. And I slid open the sliding glass door in the back of the house. No, it's not coming from outside the house, it's coming from inside the house. And I just couldn't figure out where. And I mentioned it to my wife later in the day. She didn't know what I was talking about. She'd never heard this, droning sound or anything like that. So on the third day, and I know this sounds like a parable or something like that, but on the third day I heard it again. And then I sort of received this, I call it the cosmic tap on the shoulder, one of those sort of things in the whisper in your ear that, you could build something that would do this. And it was like, you're right, I could. And then I started remembering Bob's idea, or my idea, or somebody's idea about an electronic singing bowl. And thought, oh, it kind of does sound like a big singing bowl. Big singing bowl with monks around it or something like that. And it's like, oh, that would be interesting to do, an electronic singing bowl. It doesn't have to look like a singing bowl. I mean, singing bowls are dictated, the design of a singing bowl is dictated by its function. But this is going to be an electronic device, so it could look like anything. And then I started remembering the meeting of this being that kept changing shape and had color, and made this wonderful tone to communicate with. And I remembered the geometries that the being would take and form, and it went through, it was like a cube and a sphere and an egg, but it always kept coming back to a 52-degree pyramid, and it kind of seemed like a very obvious shape. Then you start thinking about, well, that geometry is found almost everywhere on the planet. So, these little ideas, these little nuggets started to inform the design of this product. And here it is. At the beginning, I was calling Pyradym as it started to gather momentum and become defined in its structure and its composition in terms of, I like working with wood and analog tone generation and the physioacoustic aspect of it. And, as these things start to coalesce in your imagination, I was calling it a device, but by that time I started receiving more information from other sources, and I was sort of gently informed and presented with the idea that it should be called an instrument rather than a device. A device sounds very sterile, but an instrument has an open-ended concept associated with it. An instrument is something that you can express with. If you think about it, a piano is a machine. There's fulcrums in there, and there's all sorts of articulated mechanics. There's strings. It's very much of a machine, but it's the way that the individual approaches it that makes it an instrument. So what makes it an instrument is you can play Bach or Boogie Woogie on the same piano, and it's all subject to the interpretation and the intention of the operator, of the musician. So Pyradym in the same context is going to be able to follow the intention of whatever the practitioner or user wishes for it to be. It's got so many different modalities associated with it, and some people do define it depending on what they identify most with. Some people identify with the light component of it, and it's like, oh, it's a light therapy instrument. And then some people think about the sound of it, and then some people think about the physioacoustic aspect of it, the vibratory aspect of it. Some people just call it the pyramid because they identify with the geometry of it. There's that immediacy, there's that connection there. I wanted the instrument to have that characteristic. I wanted people to be engaged with it. I wanted people to fall in love with it. I'm blown away that I think about half of the instruments that are out there have names. I'll get an email and they'll say, yeah, we decided to name this. And it's like, oh, how did you come up with that one? And it's like, I don't know, I just woke up this morning and they told me that that's what the name of your Pyradym is. And it's funny too, because the name Pyradym, I woke up one morning and I looked at my pillow where my head was laying, and I saw it spelled, it looked like a neon sign. It was spelled out on the pillow as Pyradym. And it's like, oh, okay. It goes, up until that day, and I think it was only like 3 days in or so, it didn't have a name. The reminiscent aspect of Pyradym that people report, I think it's because it really does have a lot of the same tonal characteristics of the human voice. But it has such a simplistic tone. It almost sounds like a pipe organ in a certain way. It kind of has that, just a very robust, very thick, very rich, rolling sort of tone to it that sounds very satisfying. I think that there's a physiological remembrance of it that we've carried forward from other encounters with this sort of technology. This is not the first time that this technology has visited our planet. It's been here before in various forms. I think that's what people are remembering. I had a past life regression with Almarilla Bailey casting me back to a time, it was an Atlantean incarnation, where I was a healer, and I worked in this small pyramid. It was a black pyramid, like an obsidian stone sort of thing, and it had a doorway on one side, and when you walked in, all the walls were gold, and they were self-illuminating. So in other words, there was no visible source of light. And I had an understanding that it was actually a light collector, so it would collect sunlight during the day and store it, and at night it would collect starlight and store it. So it was self-illuminating. And inside there were all these incantations and things inscribed in the walls that were songs and chants and recipes and jokes. The temple itself used to generate its own set of frequencies. That building was my instrument to work with, and I think there's a reminiscent property associated with that as well. And I would face in different directions and tone. I remember wearing a big white robe while I did this with a little bit of gold trim on it, and that was my job. And it was a pretty interesting lifestyle. That's one thing Elmerilla Bailey always said, and when she was channeling Ursha, they would always say, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. Because these things, if you're open to them and you're ready to accept them, they will find you, they will visit you, and they will inform you as to what you need to do. Once you open up to your own intuition and trust your intuition and trust that you're being guided, not just from outside of yourself, but you're co-creating it. Because you're never going to get anything from the universe that doesn't resonate with you. So you're going to be sort of in the pocket, in the rhythm section. When you're locked with that drummer and you're laying down that bass line and everybody else can't help but be driven by that, what you're laying down, you can just take it wherever you want to, and it's all right.
Intuition is a very interesting thing because it becomes honed, it becomes strengthened as we are willing to open ourselves to learning more. Whether or not it's balancing my brain waves and my frequency, it's helping me with my cellular communication to the point where I can get out of the way enough so that I'm truly even more deeply present than even I yearn or reach to be. That's a phenomenal thing. That only happens with hours of meditation. That only happens with, when I come back from vacation and I'm great, I'm really fresh that first day.
I was raised Roman Catholic. I would always get into trouble because I'd be learning about things in my science classes that I would ask the nuns about. Evolution, the universe, planets, etc., and things that really just didn't fall in that belief system. But anyway, it kind of forged that path of asking questions and also instilling the idea that if I wanted answers, I needed to find my own. And so that idea sort of led me to wanting to explore the spirituality, which led me to meditation, and started reading a lot more esoteric materials and things of that nature. So, here I am, taking Reiki 1 and then Reiki 2, and then I'm a Reiki master, and then I'm going to this woman to learn how to channel, and channeling is very natural, and it's a human birthright. We all do it, whether or not we know it, and to actually and actively do it is something that, you can take up the pursuit of. And it's great because it was a callback to some of the questions I got into trouble for when I was a kid, because I would ask about the people that wrote the Bible. How do they get this? How do they get these stories? How do they get this information? How do they know this stuff? And it kind of also begs the question, well, if those guys could do it, how come there's not a new version of the Bible that's out now? What, like the door closed at some certain point in time, and that was that? We're not accepting any more submissions for higher understanding, and and all this other kind of stuff. So, being in alignment with understanding that, channeling is, we all do it, and some people are very adept at it. And that's when more information started coming through about what this was going to be. It was a group of 9 higher order energies that were overseeing this download of information on how to move through this design process, and we think that you should look into this and read this, and there's a book on pyramid power that you might be interested in, and things like that. So it's like, oh, okay, because I already had the knowledge as an electrical engineer about the hardware, how to design circuits and synthesizers and all the rest of that, and how to build power supplies and power amplifiers, because I've been doing that stuff professionally for a lot of years. So now it was going to be, okay, well, we're going to do what you already know how to do very well, but the intention is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to get more focused on the energetic aspects of how to design a power supply to be a cleaner, more energetically pure technology. How the sound is going to be, a little bit different than what you're used to doing, and because the goal is to create pure sound rather than to make music. We're here, the purpose is a little bit different. We're trying to resonate people, so we want it to be a little bit different than what you're used to. So there's a few techniques that were sort of suggested to me. So there was a group of 9, only 2 of them had incarnated on planet Earth before in human form. So like a lot of the design topics were a little too abstract for them. And so that's why there was 2 individuals on this team that had been informed before. So they kind of know how things work here in the physical realm and what's at hand currently. And again, I finally kind of sifted the names, and they named Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla as the 2 who had incarnated before, that were kind of like the directors of the design team. One morning I just woke up, and I woke up early, and I felt I needed to write. I grabbed a blank journal that somebody had given me and went down into my office and said, okay, I've got a pencil, I've got something to write on, what am I writing? And I heard the formation of a word. So, I guess I'm supposed to write that down, so I wrote the word down. And then another word. Oh, okay, and then another word, and another word, and then another word. Period, and then P-E, no, period. Oh, okay, mean like dot. Okay, that's end of sentence, I guess, all right. So it was this technique that I eventually learned, and I knew it wasn't me. It was just a stream of consciousness, and I wouldn't remember the word before the word they gave me. So in other words, they'd give me a word and I would have no recollection of what the word before it was. So I was just writing this, it was like a serial writing exercise where it was just word, period, word, and I would write for 15 minutes every morning, and then they would just stop. It was like throwing a light switch where the words just stopped coming. And it was always right at the right time that it's like, okay, so I'll set this aside and I'll jump in the shower and grab my cup of coffee and drive to the office. And so I'd be driving to work wondering what I wrote. I wouldn't know what I wrote until I got home that night. And that's when it was like some really profound stuff, and it was all related to the design of Pyradym, not necessarily so much the technical things, but just the form and function, if you will. This is what this is intended to do. This is how it operated in the past, and so you're going to keep that in mind, but also because of the requirements of what's going on the earth at this point in time, it's going to have this other thing. And so the tone generation and the light generation was kind of the easy part. Putting it all inside of a pyramidal box was the tough part. And then I find out I have to build some sort of a radio broadcast station, which is radionics. I never had heard of radionics before. I kind of saw the circuit in my head and just said, oh, okay, yeah, I can do one of those. And so that ended up in there as well. And that's what I say, you know, my takeaway on it was, I'm a good engineer, but I'm not this good. This geometry is actually encoded in certain parts of our DNA. Also, there is a natural energy collector nature of this particular geometry. So it's a collector radiator system. So it's a transmitter receiver, which is a really unusual geometry. You know, whenever they do any kind of electromagnetic readings around pyramids, they always seem to have this enhanced energetic footprint that nobody can really explain. There's a torsion radiation associated with the geometry. There's just the natural spiral energetic aspect to it. It really is just a very, very unique geometry, which is why you find them all over the planet. And they're all, you know, they're all a little different. You know, it's a pyramid, but like the step pyramids and the pyramids in the Yucatan and in South America are a little bit different than the ones that are in Thailand and you know, and in the East, in the Pacific Rim, and now they're finding them all over the place. And you know, that's kind of interesting that here in North Carolina, there's that mountain over there on the horizon that has a roughly pyramidal shape. And you look at that and you kind of go, you know, I wonder if there's, you know, whether there's one under there. And of course, you know, when they do find all the new pyramids, you know, they usually are just this part of the landscape, and then they get in there with the ground penetrating radar, and then it's like, hey, wait a minute, you know, there's something under there. And then they're finding them on Mars, and